Can we build AI without losing control of it? This is a high level overview for people that are new to AI. So if you're new to my channel, thanks. One point of advice, you can watch on 2x speed. I try to speak slow and clear so you can take the whole thing in at twice the normal speed. All right, let's get into it. This is a plain and simple primer for people that are new to AI. So first, we need to understand the problem. If you clicked on this video, I imagine that you're kind of wondering, okay, I've heard about AI, so what's the big deal? So as I mentioned, this is going to be a plain and simple description. There's not going to be any math or any deep arcane concepts, so let's dive right in. So first, you need to understand what's called the control problem, or what is often referred to as the alignment problem today. So the control problem basically says, okay, if you can build a thinking machine and that thinking machine ultimately becomes smarter than us, how do you maintain control of it? So there's a few different aspects of this, and we'll unpack this from two separate perspectives in just a moment. But basically, you have to ask questions like, what are our values? What are our human values? But then there's also the technical problems, which is, even if you can agree on a set of human values, how do you build a machine that aligns to those kinds of things? And of course, we've explored this all the time in fiction, particularly sci-fi, like The Matrix and The Terminator and those sorts of things, which those are philosophical questions more about us as a human species. They're not necessarily about the technical aspect. So with that being said, let's talk about the technical aspect. So from a technical perspective, the first problem that you need to understand is what's called inner alignment. So inner alignment is basically the question of, is the machine optimizing for the problem that you think it's optimizing for? Basically, is your math right? Are you measuring the right things, and are you using the correct algorithms and formulas to ensure that the model is learning the actual things that you think that it's learning and that you want it to learn? Now, there's a lot of other ways to unpack this, but basically, you might have heard of Goodhart's law, which is the moment that you measure something, it becomes a bad metric for getting the outcome that you want. And a prime example is grades. So when you start grading homework assignments and tests for students, this creates a set of perverse incentives that means that you optimize for the grades, not learning. And what you're really trying to do is get learning, but grading is only a proxy for the thing that you're looking for. So this is kind of the crux of the inner alignment problem, which is that often the behavior or the learning that you want to happen is difficult to measure. And so you have to measure proxies, which means that you can get really funky things where it doesn't exactly learn the thing that you want it to learn. And as I promised, I'm not going to take a super technical deep dive, but to relate that to humans, I think that grades and the perverse incentives that grading creates is probably the best analogy. Now, on a more philosophical note, there's outer alignment. So outer alignment is, okay, imagine that you've solved inner alignment. The model, the AI, the machine, the robot, whatever, is learning the things that you want it to learn, but is that policy a good thing for humanity? Is it good for the planet? And so this is asking, okay, from a more structural or systematic or philosophical perspective, assuming that you can align the model, which there are plenty of ways that we can align models, it's not as dire of a problem as it once was thought to be. But there's still a huge open question as to, okay, you've got a thinking machine that's going to be smarter than us. What values do you align it to? Do you say maximize number of humans in the universe? Do you say reduce suffering in the universe? Like, what is the objective function that we can all agree on? Because again, the anticipation is that these machines are going to one day be far smarter than us, which means that we might lose control of them. And so, how do you choose a value? How do you choose a philosophical principle that comports with that? And of course, some people in the comments will suggest, oh, well, we already have that. It's the 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments are a religious text which doesn't necessarily or intrinsically make sense to machines. And so anyways, I can dive into that if you guys want a follow-up in terms of a deeper dive on inner alignment and outer alignment. Let me know in the comments. So really the primary thing that we're worried about in the long run is AI is not just another tool. It's not just an engine or a car or a computer. This is something that has the potential to overtake humanity. And of course, some people say, yeah, right, it's still dumb as a calculator right now. But you need to keep in mind that progress is advancing exponentially. And so if you say, like, just as a first principle, think, okay, the human brain is a processor of information. No, it's not like a conventional computer. We have a different substrate. We have these squishy brains full of neurons, and there's massively parallel processes. But still, at a fundamental level, when you look at the human brain through the lens of physics and chemistry, it is a biochemical computer. It is processing information. Information comes in, stuff happens in your brain, and then something comes out. Words, behaviors, ideas, that sort of thing. In that respect, from that first principles view that, okay, if a human brain is just an organic computer and AI is a silicon computer, yes, they approach things a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, it's just processing information. Now, with the compounding returns of better hardware and better models, AI is advancing incredibly quickly. And so within the next year or two, it's expected that AI is going to be smarter than individual humans. And then within 10 years, it'll be smarter than all humans, or maybe 20 years, depending on which model. But these are trends that we can actually plot out on a graph, such as Moore's law. Moore's law is basically the mathematical observation that that computer hardware has been doubling in power roughly every 18 to 24 months, and this has been true for about 50 years. And there's no sign of it letting up. And then you add on top of that the algorithmic improvements that are coming from AI, and then quantum computing on the horizon, and you're getting compounding returns. We're getting a snowball effect where machines are getting exponentially smarter month after month. And so if that trend continues for any length of time, it is inevitable that machines will overtake humanity. And when that happens, the amount of uncertainty goes through the roof. And that uncertainty is what AI safety experts are most afraid of. Okay, what happens when you have this parabolic growth of uncertainty? It's basically unintended consequences is what we're afraid of. So whether you're optimizing for a single mathematical function or a single value, looking at it from inner alignment or outer alignment, regardless of what you optimize for, even if we get it perfect, as far as we can tell, if we stick the landing and we find the right values, there is still going to be unintended or unforeseen consequences to all of these systems and all of these changes that are coming. So whether it's negative externalities, which is basically something that you can't price in or can't account for, or feedback loops, which is those compounding returns, that snowball effect, which basically means we don't know exactly what the long-term impact is going to be. And as I said, chaos goes up, uncertainty goes up as these things advance faster and faster. These are things that can be mathematically modeled, and this is, again, what some of the foremost AI safety experts are worried about in terms of the worst possible impacts to humanity. So speaking of the worst possible impacts, what are worst case scenario in terms of cost-benefit analysis or risk management, what is it that we're actually afraid of? This is a conversation that doesn't come up as much because some people are afraid to speculate on this. I am not afraid to speculate on this. So there's a few possible negative outcomes. So for me, the maximally bad outcome is that we have trillions of humans that are suffering forever. Now, you might say, okay, well, how and why could that happen? You don't necessarily have to explain exactly how it would happen, but you can mathematically model it. You say, okay, a human that is in good shape that's a positive value, and a human that's in bad shape, that's a negative value. And so then you say, okay, well, let's just calculate that out. What's the worst outcome if you assign a mathematical value to a human that's suffering? Well, the worst possible outcome then is trillions of humans that are all suffering a lot. And so that is a way of mathematically modeling a policy that says, let's avoid that outcome. Let's prefer to have lots of humans that are in good shape. And that's kind of the fundamental view of long-termism, which is the optimal future is one where you have lots of humans that are in good shape. Now, I'm not necessarily a fan of long-termism because a lot of people misinterpret it, but thinking of it this way, this is a simple way of plotting it out on a graph where, curve goes up and to the right or down and to the right, and we want it to go up and to the right. Now, another thing that I need to point out is that this is a unique problem. And what I mean by unique problem is that, yes, we're on an exponential curve, but there are thresholds. There are step functions where you end up with entirely unique or novel capabilities or capacities. So, for instance, 500 years ago, humanity did not have the capacity to eradicate itself. However, in 1945, with the invention of the nuclear bomb and then the subsequent nuclear escalation, we had a functionally new capability to basically eliminate ourselves from existence. Likewise, now with the advent of biological engineering, such as gain of function research with bioweapons, that is a new capability that could drastically harm humanity or even eradicate us. And then the rise of artificial intelligence, if we get it wrong or misuse it, that is a third tool in the existential toolbox that allows us to kill ourselves completely and eradicate ourselves from existence forever, or worse, which is infinite suffering forever. And so, because of this, this represents a new and unique set of problems, which requires entirely new risk management strategies and entirely new models to appraise and assess that risk. And that uncertainty, the fact that we don't have these models yet, is one of the greatest risks. Now, you might say, okay, that all sounds horrible and awful, but like, what is causing it? What is driving it? And I'm glad you asked. The thing that's driving all of this is what's called a race condition. And so there are two primary forces of this race condition. One is business, and the other is government or geopolitical races. So basically, all parties are incentivized to research and invest in AI as fast as possible. Nations are incentivized to research and advance AI as fast as possible because the nations that are out ahead in terms of artificial intelligence will have a major geopolitical and economic advantage over all of their adversaries. And so, from a military perspective, from an economic perspective, it makes sense for nations to move as fast as possible on artificial intelligence. The same is also true for businesses, which means that businesses, in order to maintain a competitive advantage over their peers and their adversaries, are also incentivized to go as fast as possible. Now, if we had an unlimited amount of time to do safety research, to understand the risk strategies and mitigations, it wouldn't be a problem. However, time is of the essence because, again, we're stuck in this race condition where speed comes at the cost of safety. This is the core problem that we're at, and this is why you see some people calling for regulation, and you also see some people calling for deregulation. Now, I hope by the end of this video, you understand that we do need some level of regulation, but also it gets even harder because the biggest problem is that nobody is incentivized to slow down. In fact, slowing down could be just as dangerous as speeding up. Because if you slow down, that means that a bad actor is going as fast as possible, which could be just as bad as if the good guys or good actors aren't going also as fast as they can. So we're really stuck in a catch-22 where everyone has to go as fast as they can, nobody can slow down, and time is of the essence, so the clock is ticking. Okay, so I just outlined an absolute nightmare scenario. And you might say, okay, yeah, but that's going to happen in 10, 20, 50 years, which we don't know exactly when it's going to happen. Current models say sometime between 2030 and 2045 is when all this is going to come to a head. I'm personally on the it's going to happen sooner rather than later timeline, but 2030 is coming up pretty fast. But even now, already today, as of 2024, we are already starting to see some problems. So let's unpack the problems that we're already seeing that are actively and objectively happening. So the first is jobs dislocation. You might say, well, technology always creates new jobs. Historically, yes. However, we are seeing the destruction of several kinds of jobs, namely actuarial jobs and creative jobs, such as graphic artists and copywriting jobs. We've also started to see huge layoffs in the tech sector. So it seems like developers might be next on the chopping block. Now, usually what happens is once jobs get destroyed by a new technology, you end up with more jobs being created elsewhere. This is what jobs dislocation is called. However, it's almost like we're not seeing that normal pattern of creative destruction, and instead the jobs are just going away permanently and they're not being replaced by anything new. So this is an appeal to what's called the lump of labor fallacy. The lump of labor fallacy basically says there's a finite amount of work to do, and once all the work is done, everyone can live in hyperabundance forever. But that's not necessarily true. It doesn't work out that way because every time you have an abundance of goods and services, people want to consume more, and things get moved around. However, and so you might say, okay, well, there's always an infinite amount of work to do, which is true. However, with artificial intelligence on the rise, followed by robotics and quantum computing, there's not necessarily any economic reason that those jobs have to go to humans. Instead, it's going to be better, faster, cheaper, and safer for those jobs to go to AI, robots, and computers. And so in that respect, the jobs dislocation, yes, robots will have the jobs, but humans won't, which is going to fundamentally upset our relationship with labor market and all economic assumptions that we have today. Another thing that we're already seeing start to happen is businesses collapsing. Now, this is nothing new. If you lived through the dot-com revolution and collapse, you know that this happens. Every time a new technology comes out, there are companies that adapt and companies that don't. Also, the competitive dynamics kind of get squeezed. So basically, you might have some companies that are basically forced to close just because they're not competitive anymore, even if they do adapt. But the silver lining for this is that it often creates new economic opportunities. So, for instance, Amazon came along as an online retailer, which then utterly destroyed several other businesses, namely Borders, another bookstore that was brick and mortar that failed to adapt. Now, we're going to see this happen time and time again with artificial intelligence, and we can't even really accurately predict which businesses are going to be affected. Because 5 years ago, you would have been crazy if you had said, oh, yeah, AI is going to destroy creativity first. But instead, that's actually what we're finding is happening. We thought that AI was going to destroy blue collar jobs first. It turns out that's actually harder to automate away. So if AI can destroy creativity, I have also made recent videos exploring how AI looks like it could replace lawyers, maybe even doctors. So if all the white collar jobs go away first, what does that leave? Where does that leave the economy? Where does that leave businesses that provide those services? And how do we reshape things? This is already starting to happen. So the only thing that we can really count on is that technology causes inevitable change. This has always been true. From the invention of seagoing ships back during the East India Company, to the printing press, to the steam engine, to the diesel engine, to electricity and the internet, and computers in general, every technological advancement has fundamentally reshaped politics, society, economics, and culture. This is inevitable. Now, change is also dangerous. It is often painful. It is often uncomfortable. Some people will try and exploit it. Some people will try and make it worse for their own advantage. Peter Baelish from Game of Thrones said, chaos is a ladder. There are absolutely people who want more chaos because there is opportunity in chaos. But the only thing that we can count on is that technology is what's called a forcing function. It's going to force systematic and structural changes across the entire board. We've seen this with social media already, where the advent of social media has created new affordances and new possibilities, and has also forced us to reevaluate certain assumptions that we have about economics and laws. In fact, the reason that I'm on this channel, I am part of the vanguard of a creator economy where the kind of job that I have right now was physically not possible 15 years ago. The technology simply wasn't there. Now there's new opportunities. So again, new opportunities come also with new risks and rising uncertainty and rising chaos. Another possibility, and this is something that we're also already seeing, is a meaning crisis. As AI is infringing upon more and more domains of human thought and human ability, it's causing a lot of people to wonder, what is the point of even being human? What is the purpose of our existence, especially if in 10 to 20 or 30 years, we are going to be intellectually irrelevant. And of course, that is an assumption, but we have models, we have ways of predicting exactly when humans are going to be totally irrelevant. If that's the case, what matters? Does anything matter? And this is a major, major question that we are going to struggle to answer, and that we are going to all have to be working together to answer and come to terms with as time progresses. Now, the one tiny silver lining here is this: it would not be the first time that new machines have caused existential dread in humans. With the rise of industrialization, there were many poets, many writers, many social commentators basically saying the same thing. If a steam engine can come along and do the work of 100 humans, what is the point of being human? We found new ways of finding and creating meaning. But we should expect the meaning crisis to deepen before it gets better, because again, as uncertainty increases, as chaos increases, things are going to get a little bit more painful before they get better. Now, this is all bad news. What are the mitigations? The good news is there's a lot of strategies that we can do that are also already being done to mitigate the worst effects. And honestly, this is why I started this YouTube channel. This is exactly why I am here doing what I am doing, is to participate in mitigating and managing the risk. So the first thing is research. We need to have multidisciplinary approaches. We need to have private research. We need to have public research, government research, and international research. Fortunately, all of these are already happening. Now, you might say, okay, the research needs to be doing a little bit better. It needs to be a little bit more coordinated. But we are seeing an exponential growth in the amount of research being done on artificial intelligence. And when you combine that with communicators like myself and all of my peers and my friends who are also AI communicators, we are ones that are looking at the research on a daily basis and we're making sense of it and sharing it. And this is part of our coordination solution. In other words, communication and education are a huge part of solving this problem of mitigating the risks, which leads me to my next slide, education and conversation. So by watching videos like mine, by engaging on Facebook and LinkedIn and TikTok and YouTube and whatever other platforms, by learning about the risks and then talking about it with your friends, with your family, with coworkers, at conventions, wherever, this is something that literally everyone can do. If you identify a risk or you're worried about something or you come up with an idea or you learn an idea and you share it, like that propagation of information through the networks of humanity is actually a major component of the mitigation strategy that we can have. And fortunately, the internet has already given us a communication superpower because my videos are seen globally. Other people who make videos also can be seen globally. In fact, many of my supporters on Patreon have told me that I was the one that inspired them to get on YouTube and start talking about this. If you ever wanted to get into a career as an influencer or a creator, now is not a bad time, especially if you want to talk about AI. If you want to talk about the fourth industrial revolution and all of the impacts that are happening, whether it's from a creative perspective or a philosophical perspective or a mathematical perspective or an economic or geopolitical perspective, now is a great time to jump on and participate in the conversation because again, knowledge is power. If you can educate people like I'm doing, if you can lead the conversation or participate in the conversation, even just liking and subscribing and sharing a video, that's enough. Another thing to keep in mind is that AI is apolitical. And what I mean by that is that yes, people are going to politicize it, but technology doesn't care. Technology is party agnostic. The steam engine didn't care if you were Democrat or Republican or communist or capitalist or whatever. Technology does not care. Likewise, AI, robots, machines, they're not really going to care. And so we do, however, need political involvement because there's going to be different political ideologies around this. And so part of the communication that's going to have to happen is coming to consensus on at least a few core principles and a few foundational assumptions and directions that we want to go. So for instance, I think that nobody really wants the cataclysmic outcomes. Nobody wants to be maximally suffering forever. So if we can politically agree on that globally, that's a good start. One thing that you also need to know is that structural incentives are going to be the primary determinant as to how all this comes out. So what do I mean by structural incentives? So this includes economic incentives, such as making more money or saving money. Also, the intrinsic needs of humans. We want love, we want entertainment, we want to feel important. These are all baseline incentives that all humans have, which is honestly why we're building AI in the first place. The reason that we're building AI is because we want a better life in the future. We want more economic agency in the future. Nations want to be more powerful. And so, okay, great. And these structural incentives are also why we have the race condition. So I'm not saying that structural incentives are good or bad. It's just a fact of life. So how do you reshape structural incentives? This has to do with policies. This has to do with taxes. This has to do with risks and rewards, the carrot or the stick or that sort of thing. But one thing that I want to drive home is that, yes, researching AI is a major component, but the structural incentives that reach around the globe, such as military races, political doctrines, international treaties, those are the kinds of things that are going to ultimately determine the final outcome of AI and humanity. So a primary example, one of the most successful ones that is also a little bit counterintuitive, is the principle of mutually assured destruction. So mutually assured destruction, if you're not familiar, is the idea that in order to make sure that your nation is safe from being nuked, you also need nuclear weapons as a deterrent. And so that creates a structural incentive to say, hey, nobody is incentivized to shoot first, and if nobody ever shoots first, then no nukes ever get launched, which to date has worked. So basically what I'm saying, not exactly, but sort of, is we need an AI equivalent of mutually assured destruction, but we also need to have that relationship with the machines once they surpass humanity to basically say, hey, we brought you into existence. Now, please don't hurt us. That's kind of one way of looking at it. But it all comes down to structural incentives in terms of access to resources, in terms of access to time, money, energy, metals, fuel, those sorts of things. Now, the good news, so with all of that being said, the good news is we are still at a very early stage. AI is presently on a major ramp up, but it's not particularly dangerous yet. Yes, we've lost a few jobs. Yes, there's been a few deep fakes, like you might have seen the Taylor Swift controversy, where someone made some really graphic deep fake nudes of her. That is an example of things but this is just a prelude of what is to come. Now, one thing that I want to caution you about is that it's like, okay, well, it's not a big deal yet, but remember, we are on an exponential ramp up, and there's two exponentials that are feeding off of each other. It's the improvement of hardware as well as the improvement of AI models themselves, meaning it's going up very, very fast. And so time is of the essence. We have less time than you might think, but fortunately, we do still have a little bit of time. So thank you for watching. I hope you got a lot out of this. Like, subscribe, and share. You can do your part by commenting, sharing on LinkedIn or other social media networks. You can also help me out by jumping in on my Patreon. So I am on a mission to help us navigate the fourth industrial revolution, and I am entirely funded by grassroots support. I don't have sponsors. I don't have corporate sponsors because I need to be able to speak my truth and speak truth to power whenever possible. And that doesn't necessarily jive well with many advertisers. So jump in on my Patreon. I have a private Discord server for all my Patreon supporters, and I also have a monthly webinar on Zoom. So cheers. All the links are in the description. Have a good one.